A lot of people ask, why doesn't the Islamic Republic surrender? Why don't they capitulate? Why don't they agree to the terms of the ceasefire, or better described as the terms of surrender? The reasons why so many people are confused by the Islamic Republic's behavior is that they treat the Islamic Republic as just this one monolith. And also, they don't understand the different incentive structures that exist among different camps within the Islamic Republic. If you understand these incentives, you're going to make much more sense of the Islamic Republic's behavior. But before we go through them, it's important to understand that the existence of different incentives creates so much disagreement that the first immediate problem with responding to the Americans is that you don't have a response because you can't agree upon a response. So imagine if the Americans send you their terms and you're supposed to respond, but you don't have a response because there's an internal infighting between different camps regarding what that response needs to be. Going through the list of all of the people that are influential within the Islamic Republic and listing their incentive one by one would make this a 1-hour video. So instead of doing that, I'm going to focus on the 4 people that are being mentioned more than others and review their incentives and how they relate with each other. Let's look at Arachi, the foreign minister, Vahidi, the head of IRGC, Ghalibaf as the Speaker of Parliament, but that role is not very important. His more important role right now is that he's the main representative of the Islamic Republic as a whole. And then Mujtaba Khamenei, the Schrodinger's supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. Let's start with Arachi. That is very simple because Arachi belongs to this camp that people refer to as moderate reformers. And there's nothing moderate or reforming about them. The main role of these groups of people has always been to serve the Islamic Republic as a pressure safety valve to provide some false hope for some people whenever the pressure on the Islamic Republic is getting too high. They also are meant to provide a more moderate appearance of the Islamic Republic to foreigners whenever that is needed. And one of their most important purposes, which is not discussed as often, is that they work as a scapegoat. They used to provide that purpose for Ali Khamenei, and Arachi is doing that right now as well for the IRGC. Basically, whenever the Islamic Republic needs to do something that is not very popular with its base, they are there to take the responsibility and take the bullets so that the people in charge don't get blamed for it. You could see Arachi served this purpose very well recently by announcing that the Strait of Hormuz was open. It was obvious that he was the best candidate to put that out there because whoever confirmed that the Strait of Hormuz was open, even though it was for just a short while, whoever was going to do that was going to get attacked a lot. And Arachi thrown under the bus, and he understands that's his role. And for him to survive, he has to be useful in that way. And the word survive is actually key here, because if you want to look at everyone's incentives, that's what you have to evaluate. What makes them survive? Because right now, the Islamic Republic is in a situation where everybody is thinking about survival. And Arachi can survive if he could prove himself useful to whoever has the highest power. Going to Vahidi as the head of IRGC, if we want to look at his incentives, we're basically looking at the survival of IRGC. And Vahidi is now the head of IRGC, but there are other important people that maybe at some point we're going to talk about, like Zolghadr, Abdullahi, Nejat, Jafari, and Musavi. These are people that you might hear about them more soon, and we'll discuss them as well. But let's focus on Vahidi to keep everything simple. Vahidi's incentives are very clear for anybody who has been following the politics within the Islamic Republic for years. The survival and also the growth of IRGC and their influence has always depended on anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, expansionist strategies of the Islamic revolutionary ideology beyond the borders of Iran, on isolationism. This has provided IRGC with monopoly over many industries within Iran, on creating leverage in other countries and therefore increasing their deterrence capability, and most importantly, having control over the oil and gas revenue coming from Iran. So anything that opens the economy of Iran to the world, any sign of normal relationships between the regime in Iran and the rest of the world, has always been a threat to their empire. What we're seeing right now with IRGC is basically a continuation of that strategy, if you put yourself in the position of Vahidi, you could see why you would oppose capitulating to the Americans. You might have thought that the priority of IRGC would have been to stop the bombardments, stop the killing of the leaders, stop the blockade of the Iranian ports, and basically that would help them survive. But from their perspective, if they stop fighting and if they agree to President Trump's terms, that would actually be the end of them, because that will bring their entire empire down, because their very existence depends on everything that I just mentioned. They rather continue fighting and accept all of the cost associated with that, because they know that the terms put in front of them is basically the same as surrendering to them, and that would eventually lead to the complete collapse. So many of the terms by President Trump removes the remaining deterrence capabilities that they have. And if we go down that path, what you're going to have is basically President Trump pulling their teeth one by one through negotiations rather than through war. And this would lead to eventually the opening up of Iran's economy, their lack of control over Iran's industries, including the oil and gas, and also their influence in countries outside of Iran. That would be the end of them. They wouldn't be able to generate enough revenue to protect themselves. And with the surrender, they wouldn't even have enough people who would want to fight for them for ideological reasons. So if you look at it from Vahidi's perspective, this is a matter of survival, and resisting the terms and maybe continuing fighting against the Americans and Israelis will now make more sense to you. Mojtaba Khamenei might be in a coma, he might be dead, he might be severely injured. What we do know is that if he's even alive, he's probably not in control. The statements that are coming out from him are either completely made up, or he's just basically agreeing to whatever they think he needs to say. Given that we are not really sure about his conditions, the only reason why I included him on this list is because it helps us understand Ghalibaf's incentive structure. Because Ghalibaf's legitimacy right now comes mostly from the claim that Mojtaba Khamenei's statements are true. They're from Mojtaba, because many of these statements includes endorsements of Ghalibaf and an approval of the negotiations and ceasefire and stuff like that. Ghalibaf has very little leverage compared to the leaders within the IRGC without all of these claims regarding Mojtaba Khamenei's statements endorsing him. We saw somebody from the Paidari camp, Jalili, seem to have posted something doubting whether these statements are coming from Mojtaba or not, and that was a big deal. But you can see that there are more people who are now from the Paidari camp, and others are willing to come out and maybe challenge the idea that these statements are from Mojtaba. If you follow Ghalibaf's history and his career, you could see that this person is not very ideologically driven, and this is a person that uses the ideology of the regime for his own self-interest. It's very clear to many people that he has always been more motivated by wealth and power. In fact, he was called out by other leaders within IRGC a couple of years ago for exactly that. He's power hungry, and his dream has always been to be the number one guy within the Islamic Republic. And after Ali Khamenei's death, he's now closer to that than ever. However, he's flying too close to the sun, and he might die because of all of this. And I think his incentives are now mostly not to die. I think that he knows that if these negotiations don't work out, he is next on the kill list. He knows the only reason why he's alive so far is because President Trump has put him on a no-kill list, or else the Israelis would have killed him by now. And I think he's terrified that these negotiations are not going to work out. And that's why his incentives are now mostly personally driven. Rather than trying to save the Islamic Republic, he's just trying to save himself. By pushing for the negotiations, he's also losing a lot of legitimacy among regime followers, because it seems like he's negotiating and talking to the people who just killed their supreme leader, and he's capitulating. This is why he came on TV and tried to make the case for why the negotiations are important. He did a very poor job and it backfired. But then again, just recently, we got another statement from Mojtaba Khamenei out of nowhere coming out saying that, oh yeah, Ghalibaf, he has my endorsement, go do negotiations. So it's basically the same story of Muhammad, again, whenever he needed to convince people that behaving adverse will come from Allah, and then everybody had to listen to that. I think Ghalibaf is treating Mujtaba Khamenei and making stuff up and putting words in his mouth the same way Muhammad did with Allah. It's interesting to see that now more and more regime supporters are questioning that. This is all just scratching the surface when it comes to different people and their incentives. I try to simplify it. If you want to come and talk to me about this in more detail and other topics as well, the link to our discussion group is below. I'm there almost every day. You could come talk to me. Let me know in the comment section if this was helpful. Any comment that tells me that this is good information or it's educational or if it was interesting, it really motivates me to make more videos like this. My name is Armin Navabi. I'm Israel Khai. Long live America. Javid Shah. Payandeira.